Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait for another minute or two because we've got a flood of folks who are entering from the lobby, and we'll get underway in just another minute or two. Okay, I think we are ready to get started. Hi, everyone. I am Charlene Briner. I am the Interim Director of Minnesota's brand new Office of Cannabis Management. And we are really delighted that so many of you could join us this evening for the second implementation update that we have done for the public. Some of you may have joined us back in August when it was really early days, shortly after legalization of cannabis occurred in Minnesota. And we talked a lot about our plans for moving forward to stand up the office, including how we plan to launch rulemaking. In the subsequent 6 months since that update in August, a lot of progress has been made to both stand up the office and really get underway with rulemaking. But we also recognize that so much of the work that we are doing is invisible. So we thought it was time for us to share with you some of the work that we're doing. I want to just pause for a moment and let folks know if you're having trouble with your connection, you can email cannabis.info@state.mn.us with information about the technical difficulties that you may be having, whether it's audio, whether it's actually seeing the screen. We have IT folks standing by to help you with any connection issues or other technical questions or technical issues you may be experiencing. And if for some reason you're not able to fully join tonight, never fear. We're planning to provide a recording of this full session and post it to the OCM website within the next couple of days. So our agenda tonight is pretty robust. We hope to give you an overview first of the teams we have working to stand up the Office of Cannabis Management. We want to share with you some of the contracts that we've put in place, our work with temporary regulations, including the work that the Office of Medical Cannabis is doing to regulate the hemp-derived cannabinoid products that you see on so many shelves throughout the state. Give you an update on new members to our team, the technology work that we're doing, some of the work that we're doing with other agencies. As so many of you may be aware, this law is expansive in nature, and there are a lot of agencies across the state government enterprise that own a piece of this work. So we want to just talk a little bit about how we're staying connected with those agencies. We want to share with you, some of you may have read in the last week or so that we submitted some legislative reports to the legislature, both a growth and demand study and legislative recommendations to sort of preview what we hope to bring forward this coming session. And then I'm joined by two talented colleagues who will be providing rulemaking updates, an update on our community and engagement work, and then sort of a look ahead to the coming months so that you have a clear sense of what's coming and what the progression of our work will look like over the coming months and the coming year as we prepare to launch the market and issue applications for licenses. Speaking of those talented individuals, Vanessa Vogl is a rulemaking attorney at the Department of Human Services who is, I don't want to say on loan because it's not a volunteer job. She has generously been volunteered or voluntold on behalf of her agency to provide us some guidance and leadership around rulemaking. We're very grateful to have her. And also our outreach and engagement director, Melekin, who has been in community with organizations and associations, really talking about OCM and our stand-up work, but just as importantly, listening and gathering input and feedback that is informing everything from how we think about structuring the agency to how we are drafting those rules that Vanessa is working on a daily basis. So first, because as I said, so much of this work is invisible, and because people see that we are hiring, but it may seem to some folks that the work is slower, they're wondering how we're actually doing all the work that we need to do. What we have done is create a structure of implementation experts. So we've created what we're calling cross-agency implementation teams, and those teams are focused on very specific work streams. IT and business and operational systems, communications, both to external advocates and audiences, as well as internal state agency audiences. We are working very closely with Minnesota's 11 tribes on both tribal compacting and other issues that impact our Native community. We have a cross-agency team for planning purposes to really help us identify our milestones and make sure that we're accountable for meeting them. We are obviously building a budget, and along with that budget, thinking about how we pay for everything from staff to a new building to a state reference lab. We think it's very important for the state to play a role in establishing lab standards and making sure that we have that capacity as part of a holistic approach to launching our market. From those implementation teams, we have what we call strike teams. So we have a team working, as I mentioned, at the Department of Health on temporary regulations and business registrations. We have our rulemaking strike team that are evaluating all of the requirements for developing our regs and then starting to put pen to paper to draft those regulations, informed by the input and surveys that many of you, I would anticipate, have taken time to fill out. And for that, we thank you. We've got an HR strike team that is solely focused on writing positions, helping them classify them appropriately, and then helping us post and move through the entire interview process. We've got a legislative team that really is focused on, and we'll talk about this a little later, focused on what we need to do and what we need to bring forward in the coming session, licensing system and design to make sure we're designing a system that's easy for folks to navigate, and then outreach and engagement. As I mentioned, Merone is leading that work and doing a fabulous job. So altogether, we have a 23-member implementation team representing experts from multiple agencies in the enterprise. We have 25 Office of Medical Cannabis staff who are working on regulation of both the hemp-derived cannabinoid products and the medical program in Minnesota, and also providing critical support for transition and planning. Some of you may remember from the last update we did that the Office of Medical Cannabis is scheduled to be integrated within the Office of Cannabis Management. So all things cannabis will be under one umbrella, from adult use to the hemp-derived products to the medical program. And then we've also got 2 Department of Agriculture inspectors who are adding some inspection capacity to the work that the folks at the Department of Health are doing as they are out in the field working with businesses to ensure product safety and quality. And that folks are compliant with the laws and the expectations that the legislature provided when the bill was passed and the law was signed. Oops, sorry about that. So we've also executed 2 significant contracts. We will have more contracting opportunities to come in the future weeks and months as we continue to ramp up our work. But right now, Carasoft Technology Group is taking the lead to develop our business application and licensing system. We want to make sure that we are designing it with an end user in mind so that when people get to the point of coming to OCM to apply for a license, that system is easy to navigate, that it is fully functional, and that it can handle the volume that we anticipate coming from so many business applicants. We've also engaged in a contract with Cannabis Public Policy Consulting. They are a national consulting firm that has worked with states and tribal nations and cities to set up cannabis regulatory operations. They are unique in the cannabis consulting space and implementation space, known both for data and research, and also they work solely with government entities. So don't have private industry clients and really work from a regulatory standpoint. They've been a wealth of information for us about trends, challenges, litigation risks, best practices in implementation and regulations. And so we work closely with them on our implementation work. As I mentioned, our HR implementation team is working hard to draft positions and help us begin to staff up. So just you can see on the screen some of the key positions we have hired since we last met in August, including 2 hires that will be coming on board. Yep, actually 2. We've got one on here. Our finance director is starting in the middle of February, and we just made an offer that was accepted within the last 24 hours to a communications director. So we'll be welcoming that individual on board toward the end of February. Positions that are coming. We continue to work for to fill the social equity position. The Cannabis Advisory Council coordinator. Some of you saw that the council members were named, and we need a point person to make sure that we can plan appropriately, facilitate and coordinate all of the logistics involved with that 51-member council. And then obviously of interest to folks who are really thinking about how we are going to be approaching our grants program for the Can Renew grants, the community reinvestment grants. We want to make sure to get a person on board who really has perspective on how to develop and administer an equity-centered grants program for those community reinvestment grants. So those positions will be coming along with more as we continue building out our regulatory operations. You're going to see everything from licensing specialists to compliance and inspection roles to coordinating roles, and a lot of the frontline specialized technical staff that we will need to be a fully functioning agency. So keep your eye out. You can always go to our website to see the latest positions that are in the hopper. Our application system, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that this is user-friendly, both for the applicants who are going to be applying for a license and for the regulators who are going to be using it to provide information to them about appropriate levels of compliance and enforcement. That is our responsibility. So you can see that we are making a lot of progress. We are hoping to be field testing that system by late spring so that we can ensure that when we actually go live with applications, that it is working, that it is able to handle the volume, and that we can make sure that that system is a fully functional tool for all the things that we will need. You can see some of the pieces that we've already completed are: what does the application process look like? The renewal process. What are our application forms going to look like from the IT perspective? And developing a complaint form. So continuing to work on that, making good progress, and getting ready for beta testing within the next couple of months. The Cannabis Advisory Council, which will be a key thought partner and advisory body to really help us think through and act as thought partners, advisors, and experts from a wide range of perspectives about ensuring both the success and sustainability of Minnesota's cannabis industry, but also bringing a range of perspectives on everything from business to public health to concerns around substance use and recovery and research. And so there is a wide range and a diverse range of thought and expertise among those 51 applicants. Governor Walz has made the first 18 public appointments. There are 16 more public seats that remain to be appointed. The Office of Boards and Commissions at the governor's office continues to lead that process of vetting, screening, and naming those members, and hope to make the last 6 of those public appointments within the next I would say within the next month, certainly before the end of the first quarter of 2024, because we're hoping to convene the first meeting by the end of the first quarter. And then there are also a number of direct appointments. I believe that it is 29 direct appointments with various associations, agencies, organizations, tribal governments. They have direct appointees to the council, and we continue to work with those organizations. I think that it's fair to say that those direct appointees came in a little slower than we'd expected. So we've sent reminders and are working closely with those organizations to make sure that by the time we convene that first meeting, we have the fullest representation and perspective possible as indicated in the law. I want to touch on the legislative reports. I mentioned that we submitted 2 legislative reports on January 16th. They were required to be submitted on January 15th. That was Martin Luther King Day and obviously a state holiday. So we got the bonus of an extra day to submit those reports to the legislature. And there were two of them. The first was our requirement to submit an annual report to the legislature, which really highlights both the current state of the industry and also previewed for the public some of the asks that we will be making, or some of the recommendations we will be making for some modifications to the law that are really designed, and I'm going to go into a little detail about this, but really designed to both help us launch successfully and in a timely way, and also to help us effectively regulate over time. It is very clear, and I will get into this, the legislature and advocates made very clear the overall outcomes and goals that we hope for in this bill. Our goal is not to change or do a wholesale rewrite, but rather to just strengthen and make more robust those foundational underpinnings of the law, particularly as it relates to social equity applicants and this idea of Minnesota really creating a Minnesota-driven craft market. We also did an examination of cannabis consumers and cannabis demand in Minnesota, which is really colloquially known as our growth and demand study. In that study, I'm just going to touch on that. The top lines, and it's a thoroughly researched and analyzed study that really gives us an idea of projected demand in Minnesota for the cannabis industry. What we can see from the research that was done, the surveys of cannabis consumers, and the consumption comparisons to both national states that have legalized adult use and also neighboring states like Michigan and Missouri, we can project a pretty robust demand for cannabis in Minnesota that, based on findings that detail consumer use. Actual past month usage in Minnesota is a little higher than the national average, and that would certainly project a robust demand for cannabis, which is promising for people who are interested in getting into the business space. We also see in that report some qualifications, some uncertainty, really given the unique status of Minnesota and the hemp market, or the hemp products that have really proliferated in Minnesota since they were made legal about a year and a half ago. Actually, coming close to 2 years in July of this year. Because no other state has really introduced or approached legalization in the way that Minnesota has with the hemp-derived products, there is some qualifications about, or some uncertainty about how those hemp products and that those consumer habits may impact adult use. And there are multiple ways that this could go. We could find that consumer habits are somewhat hardened and it diminishes demand for adult use. Conversely, we could see that adult use offers products not available in the hemp space right now. And so that could result in some folks migrating to adult use at the expense of the hemp market. Or a third scenario is that consumer habits and the robust demand for cannabis in multiple iterations and multiple types of products could really make Minnesota a leader in a comprehensive industry that offers a range of choices for consumers who choose to consume cannabis. So we do qualify any of our projections based on that uncertainty and the lack of national trend data to compare to, but we are optimistic that there will be a robust market for cannabis in Minnesota. And then the last really top line in that report, there is some data that suggests diversion from regulated medical markets, so the medical program, into illicit sales. Folks that were surveyed identified their source of cannabis in multiple ways, including medical cannabis. And a lot of folks that are getting medical cannabis do not identify as medical patients. So there is certainly some information or some research that would indicate some diversion. That is not unusual. We see that in other states, but it is something that we will continue to keep an eye on. You can read those studies, and it's probably in here somewhere, but you can certainly go to the OCM website, and in the About Us section, legislative reports, you can click on that to read the study at any time. We also, in our legislative report, as I mentioned, is to I think that really what folks paid attention to was some of the proposals we hope to bring forward. What we really want to do is strengthen the social equity goals of the bill. We're using two lenses as we think about what we want to bring to the legislature. As I mentioned, what do we need to do to launch successfully to make sure that when 2025 rolls around, we are in the best position to offer a seamless, functional system and process for licensing applicants, that the expectations are clear for business operators and regulators alike, and for the public. And then the second thing, what do we need to regulate well over time? So that's really the two lenses that we're using to really propose some changes in the 5 buckets that you see. We want to make some supply chain improvements to streamline that process from the point of cultivation. We want to strengthen the already robust social equity goals in the bill. We believe that the intention of the law is very clear, but that there are opportunities to make some of those social equity opportunities even more robust. We've identified a potential for a licensing bottleneck that we want to address through a slight change in the order of operations in the licensing process. We want to, and this is really a reflection of some of the feedback we got and also that we've gotten, and also our understanding that the more quickly we can be set up to offer licenses to applicants, the better we are to get our arms around both the illicit market and to really signal to consumers an alternative to the illicit cannabis market, and launch well by our 2025 goal. So we want to include a mechanism for temporary licenses, particularly for social equity applicants. And when I say temporary licenses, I mean early licenses. So as soon as this summer, depending on if the legislature decides to take us up on that. And then we want to update the timeline to transition parts of the Office of Medical Cannabis to OCM as early as this summer to help us align our efforts and build some capacity. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about each of these 5 so that you sort of understand OCM's rationale for making these recommendations, and that you have a better idea of how we're approaching the wide span of responsibility that is given to us in the new law. So our first proposed change is really about streamlining operations, particularly at the point of cultivation. What we know is that cannabis is cannabis until the point of manufacture. And we also know that there's a very complex licensing scheme in place in the law that requires a separate supply chain at the point of cultivation for adult use and for medical cannabis. We propose merging those while also maintaining the protections against vertical integration that would open the door to multi-state operators or bigger cannabis companies, given the legislature's very clear direction that they want to see this Minnesota-grown system of micro and meso businesses and limited vertical integration for the larger operators. So streamlining that both aligns with best practices in other states. It avoids some of the retroactive changes that come from inevitable streamlining. Other states have tried to maintain 2 different supply chains, and that has ended up merging and has caused a lot of cost on the back end for cultivators who have had to retrofit or adapt to new expectations. We want to eliminate that. And we believe that simplifying the regulatory processes also makes better use of our staff capacity to inspect and to make sure that we're not experiencing delays in that licensing process. We also know that if we can streamline at the point of cultivation, it is going to save some cost for operators on the front end, and hopefully those cost savings will also be reflected in the cost for products for consumers and position us more competitively. We want to take some steps to strengthen the social equity components in the bill. As I mentioned, the legislature and advocates were very clear about the social equity outcomes and expectations in this bill and the opportunities to repair some of the harms that communities and individuals have faced due to the overcriminalization of cannabis. So we want to create a special designation for a social equity classification in the license, just to better identify and make sure that we are looking at the right pool of social, when I say the right pool, that they are actually social equity applicants. Right now, the way that the law is written is so broad and so expansive that essentially anybody could potentially qualify as a social equity applicant. And that comes with some potential for missing opportunity and first mover advantage for true social equity applicants who have experienced harm in multiple ways or who would be likely applicants under the social equity definitions. We want to provide a first mover advantage for applicants who are considered social equity applicants. Um, and we want to make we also want to make some changes to the ownership requirements. Right now, we've identified that the ownership requirements of 100% for a social equity applicant actually create some undue risk, financial hardship for social equity applicants. Um, because that 100% requirement in an industry in which capital is incredibly hard to access creates some undue burden at the very beginning of the process. So we propose changing the ownership requirement from 100% to 65%, which increases the opportunity for social equity applicants to actually acquire capital and secure funding and ownership shares. I would just to put that in context, the national average for social equity applicants or designation is between 51 and 60% ownership. We landed on 65% because it was clear to us the legislature wanted to make a statement about the risk of some of the predatory practices we've seen in other states, where you see straw applicants actually uh, being used by larger companies to get a foothold or a first mover advantage as a social equity applicant. And so keeping that percentage at 65% is both robust compared to the national average, but also loosens that opportunity to access capital and form partnerships that are advantageous, particularly for social equity applicants. I should have mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is really a sharing of information. We're continuing to, and Merone will talk about this, continuing to have conversations. We've had lots of questions as we've started to share information about this, and happy to answer them, and also happy to continue to iterate our thinking about making sure that these proposals are thoroughly vetted and that we are making sure we're meeting the intended expectations and not running into unintended consequence. So even though we're not in a question and answer session this evening, there will be lots of opportunities to weigh in on this as we move forward. Our third proposed change is really removing a potential licensing bottleneck in the way the statute outlines the process, and also reducing the potential for financial hardship should there be unanticipated disruptions in the licensing process. So the way it works right now, an applicant would not even come to OCM until several steps down in the process of standing up their business. One of the most prohibitive parts of, and particularly for a cultivator, but for at all steps, is securing your building. What we see in the law is that an applicant would be required to enter into a mortgage or a lease before even coming to OCM or going to their local government and trying to secure that building and spend thousands, if not millions of dollars on a facility without any assurance of obtaining a license is incredibly it's incredibly expensive and uncertain and creates a great deal of risk for potential business operators. So what we propose is a change in the order of operations. We propose that the first step is folks coming to OCM. They would apply for a license. They would fill out all the requirements and submit all the required documentation that is required by law. OCM would do its due diligence, and at the end of that process would issue a provisional or a temporary license to that applicant. That business applicant would then take that provisional or temporary license, to their local government, and they would get all of their boxes checked, right? Their local ordinances, their zoning permits, all of the things that the city would need and that they require for a business to operate in their locality. It also gives that locality, that local government entity, some information that OCM has done its due diligence about the viability of the license applicant in front of them. And so we believe that that makes sense, both from an information and a best practices standpoint, and also, as I've said, mitigates that financial risk on the front end. And then as the last step in the process, after they've gotten all of their local approvals, an applicant will come back to OCM, at which time we issue them a full license, and the endorsements required that designate what activities they'll be engaged in, whether it is retailing, cultivating, manufacturing, or a vertically integrated license. And so we believe that that change in the order of operations is a good one. It helps us avoid some of the pitfalls that we've seen in other states. California comes to mind. We've seen, because of challenges and slowdowns to the licensing system, that people have secured their building and then have spent millions, thousands, if not millions of dollars before even being able to obtain a license and operate. So we want to mitigate that financial risk on the front end. Change number 4, this really comes in as a result of lots of conversations with folks, our recognition that we both have an aggressive timeline to meet and that we want to, as I've mentioned multiple times, strengthen the opportunities for social equity, the opportunities for social equity applicants to get moving early. So we believe that if the legislature grants us the authority, we could be issuing licenses, temporary licenses, as soon as late summer. Implementing these temporary licenses for social equity applicants gives a first mover advantage. It takes steps to really be prepared for successful market launch. And we believe that by doing so, while we continue to move forward on the rulemaking process, that we have a more likely chance of launching successfully and making sure that the expectations to have licenses available no later than 2025 is better met. Vanessa will talk a little bit about rulemaking. We are making really good progress in drafting the rules and regulations, and we'll be test driving them as we go. But there are a lot of things beyond our control, not the least of which is the timeline of the reviser who has to draft and put the rules in a particular format and then sending them off over to the Office of Administrative Hearings. There are multiple things that could slow down the regular rulemaking process. And so issuing these temporary regulations not only gives first mover advantage, but allows us to continue moving forward to launch the market until such time as we have rules that have been adopted and are in force. And then finally, we propose, some of you know that there's an interesting dynamic right now. The Office of Medical Cannabis holds the authority to regulate hemp products. The Office of Cannabis but what they can't regulate are sales of things that we've seen in the news, things like raw flower that will be legal once licenses are issued, but are not under the law right now. OCM has the authority to regulate those products right now, those illegal sales of raw flower that are not allowed until licenses are in place. However, we're still building capacity. So accelerating the transition and bringing over the enforcement team from the Office of Medical Cannabis, who are in charge of regulations for the hemp-derived products, bringing them on board and over to OCM as early as July 1st of 2024 helps us better integrate those operations, develop additional consistency in our enforcement approach, and really gives OCM some foundational capacity for the staff that is already on board there and more fully integrate them into our overall operations. We would also make sure that we mitigate any gap in a disruption of access to medical patients. Some of you know that the full transition of the Office of Medical Cannabis is scheduled for March 1st of 2025. In the event rulemaking would go beyond our extended or beyond our hoped for adoption date, we want to make sure there's no disruption in the medical program and that medical patients can continue to access those products. So we want to address that date by making sure that once the rules are adopted, we're actually in a position to fully integrate them. So that really summarizes the 5 changes that we want to make. We believe that a streamlined supply chain will be the result, enhanced outcomes for social equity, a more efficient licensing process, and proactive measures for market launch. I realize I'm doing a lot of talking at you, but I thought it was important for all of you to hear from us about why we're approaching these proposals in the way we are. And so hopefully I wasn't talking so quickly that you weren't able to keep up. Looking ahead, okay, we're not looking ahead yet. That's my cue. Once I go through the proposed changes, my cue is to hand it over to my colleague, Vanessa Vogl, who's really going to give you an update about where we are in the rulemaking process, how we're using the input that you've provided to us through the surveys and conversations that we've had with many of you. And so I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Charlene. Good evening, everyone. As Charlene mentioned, I am the rulemaking attorney at the Department of Human Services, but I've been working in an advisory capacity as a rulemaking coordinator with the Office of Cannabis Management since June. And it's my pleasure to give you this update about what we've accomplished so far in the rulemaking effort and where we are headed. So as a reminder, the bill that legalized adult use cannabis created the framework for the regulatory program that will carry out the cultivation, manufacturing, and sales of cannabis in Minnesota. The Office of Cannabis Management is tasked with overseeing that regulatory program, as Charlene was talking about, and has also been given the authority to further establish the program through rulemaking. Rulemaking is the way in which the Office of Cannabis Management makes legally enforceable the requirements necessary for making adult use cannabis operational in Minnesota, while also achieving our goal of creating a safe, accessible, and equitable cannabis market for Minnesotans 21 and older who choose to consume. The legislature gave the office further authority to conduct this initiative. Standard rulemaking allows the office to create rules with minimal public engagement and without having to hold a hearing or prepare formal supporting documents for the rules. However, because of the heightened level of public interest in these rules, as evidenced by all the people joining us today on this webinar, and the depth and breadth of the impact these rules will have on the lives of Minnesotans, the office has chosen to pursue a more robust public engagement approach. So what that looks like and how it's going will be the focus of this rulemaking update. So taking a quick look here at the overall projected timeline for rulemaking, the bulk of the rulemaking process is collecting feedback from the public and identified subject matter experts, consulting with other state agencies as required by the legislation, and putting that all together into the actual rule language. So that's where we're at right now in this first part of the timeline, and we expect to continue this part of the work through the middle of the summer. As Charlene mentioned, one other thing to note on this first part of the timeline is that one of the aspects of rulemaking that is required, whether expedited or not, is that before the rules can be formally proposed, the revisor's office must review the draft language and ensure that it is in the proper form to fit with other rules in the state. So this review can take considerable time, especially for new rules and longer sets of rules, both of which are true for the cannabis rules. But we have already been in conversation with the revisor's office about this to ensure that our timeline works as best as it can with theirs, so we can be as efficient as possible with this requirement. In terms of the remaining timeline, another important bullet to note is that for an expedited rulemaking, there is still a requirement that the rules go through a formal public comment period of at least 30 days. We expect that comment period to begin sometime in the fall by publishing what's called a Notice of Intent to Adopt Rules in the Minnesota State Register, as well as sending that information out through the office's rulemaking email listserv and making it available on the website. So if you want to sign up to receive notice of when this formal public comment period begins, as well as other alerts like this about rulemaking, you can do so on the office's rulemaking webpage. After that comment period, the office will address any remaining issues with formal responses, and both the public comments and the responses from the office, as well as the final draft rules, will then be submitted to an administrative law judge at the Office of Administrative Hearings. Again, as Charlene mentioned, another piece of the puzzle here. The administrative law judge then has 14 days to review and either approve or disapprove the rules with recommendations. And so then the office has another opportunity to refine the rules if the administrative law judge disapproves them in whole or in part, and then resubmit for approval. So once the rules have final approval from the Office of Administrative Hearings, then the governor has an opportunity to veto in a 14-day window. We certainly hope that won't happen, and if the governor does not veto the rules, then the Office of Cannabis Management must publish a notice of adoption of rules in the state register, and the rules go into effect upon publication of that notice. So our projected goal, again, for the rules going into effect is early 2025. And once the rules are in effect, complete licensing applications will be available shortly thereafter. Just have to get to the next slide here. Just give me a moment. Having some, there we go. As I mentioned, we are in the midst of getting initial public input into the draft rules, and we have solicited feedback on the various topics that will be addressed in the rules by creating surveys that we have made available to the public. The link to an open survey can be found on the rulemaking page of the office's website. And the link has also been emailed out to people who have signed up to receive those rulemaking alerts. Survey number 6 opened yesterday. It solicits feedback on laboratory standards and edible product standards. In total, for all the surveys so far, we have received over 1,000 responses containing great information from interested community members, advocates, and partners in this work. We have been reviewing every single survey response that comes through and finding that they have value not only for rules input, but also for informing general regulatory planning and other activities carried out by the office, such as market development and continued engagement beyond rulemaking efforts. We are working on preparing a public report to share the themes and priorities that have come to the forefront through the surveys. So if you want to be sure to get that report, again, please sign up for rulemaking alerts via the website, and it's the best way to get information and updates about rulemaking. We also expect to take some time in the spring to make rule drafts available to the public for informal comment and feedback ahead of the formal comment period, so that we can address any issues and continue refining the language. So just to give you a little snapshot here of what the surveys have looked like, and their topics and response rates. The surveys solicit feedback on topics that have been identified in the legislation as required to be addressed in the rules, along with a few other topics that the office has identified as important to address in rule or other guidance. As noted here on the slide, survey number 1 collected feedback about cultivation, processing, and manufacturing, which garnered 751 responses, 484 of which were specifically about cultivation. Survey 2 collected feedback about testing, environmental controls, and the use of pesticides and fertilizers with 199 responses. Survey 3 collected feedback about retail business operations, retail sanitary standards, and an expedited complaint process for local units of government about a cannabis business with 257 responses. Survey 4 collected feedback about packaging and labeling, and the integrated cannabis tracking, inventory, and verification system with 373 responses. Survey 5 collected feedback about licensing and social equity considerations with 394 responses. Survey 6, as I mentioned, is open now and is collecting feedback on laboratory standards and edible product standards. Survey 7, which is the final planned survey, will open on February 12th and collect feedback on medical cannabis and the patient registry program. And I want to just make clear that even though surveys 1 through 5 have closed, this is not meant to limit the ability to provide input. If interested parties, people on this webinar, have relevant thoughts, resources, or considerations to share about any of these topics, please email them directly to the rules email, which is available as a link on the office's rulemaking webpage. We want to hear from you, is the point. The legislation, as I mentioned, also requires the office to consult with other state agencies that regulate or have experience regulating some of the specific topics addressed in rulemaking. In particular, the office must consult with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency about environmental standards, with the Department of Commerce about energy standards, and with the Department of Agriculture about certification, testing, and labeling requirements for the methods used to grow new cannabis or hemp plants. So we have met several times with experts from each of these agencies. And in addition to the public survey responses, in addition to that data, the information gathered at these meetings with other staff at state agencies and subsequent follow-up emails has directly informed initial draft language for the rules. We are currently putting pen to paper, or maybe more accurately, fingers to keyboard, and drafting language for environmental standards and cultivation. And experts at the Pollution Control Agency are actually currently reviewing a very preliminary draft related to environmental standards. So in addition to these consultations and survey responses, we are also researching cannabis rules in other states to inform our rules, as well as assessing existing regulations in Minnesota that are related or have an impact on the cannabis industry. We have been working directly with staff from the Office of Medical Cannabis at the Department of Health on updates to the rules governing medical cannabis, which will be integrated with the adult use rules and enforced by the Office of Cannabis Management in the near future, as Charlene mentioned. So just in addition to what's required to be in rule, we have also started researching and consulting with related industries about developing best practices and guidance related to topics like the use of pesticides, fertilizers, soil amendments, and plant amendments in relation to growing cannabis. The science related to these topics is quickly evolving, and although best practices do not have the force and effect of law like rules do, the office recognizes the usefulness of having guidelines in place while responding quickly to this evolution. And some of this work is just parallel to what is required to be in rules, so we're starting that work as well. As I noted earlier, we are expecting to host listening sessions likely sometime this spring when we have drafts of the rules to elicit informal comments and feedback. We are currently preparing for that by getting draft rule language in place and planning what those public input sessions will look like. So to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, we don't expect that the rules adopted by the office in early 2025 will please everyone all the time. But we do want to get the rules as right as we possibly can for this moment as we launch the adult use cannabis industry in Minnesota, which is why we are taking time on the front end here for careful drafting and seeking input. And indeed, the more input we can gather, the more needs and anticipated outcomes we can consider. So I encourage you to submit your feedback. And with that, I will turn it over to Merone.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. My name is Merone Melekin. I am the Director of Outreach and Engagement here at the Office of Cannabis Management, and excited to just share some of the work that we've been able to do with you all and hope to continue to do with you all over the next year or so. Just to provide a little bit of grounding, the goal of the outreach and engagement and really external relations team here at OCM is to develop comprehensive, scalable community outreach and engagement plans for the different stages of the implementation office here at the Office of Cannabis Management, recognizing that we're going through a lot of iterations here, that there are a lot of steps to this process. We want to make sure that we're always scaling our outreach, that we are engaging with the right folks, that we're recognizing where we may not be doing enough and that we need to continue to do more, and really just taking the essence of what was in the bill about repairing harm and keeping that at kind of the ground of the work that we do, and especially within our engagement efforts. And so I will give you just kind of an update of some of the work that we've been doing and what we continue to plan to do. Just to kind of provide you with a general overview of some of the community engagement efforts to date and the things that we plan to do in the future. There are a few just infrastructure things that already exist that are ways that you guys can engage with our office. The OCM website, I'll say, is a great tool just for being able to find information about our office, ways that you can engage with us. It's really the best place to find the most up-to-date information, releases that we're sending out, ways to stay up to date on rulemaking, engagement efforts, etc. There's also a number of resources that are on there as well, including our speaker engagement request system. if you would like us at the Office of Cannabis Management to be at your events, if you want to engage with us, even if it's one-on-one conversations with groups out in the community, please submit requests through that request form, because those are the best ways that not only myself, although I'm sure a number of you have seen me, others from our office, subject matter experts, can get out into the community and have some of those conversations. Which leads us to our community cannabis conversations. These are organic conversations that have been happening as a result of requests that have been coming in through our speaker request form. People just wanting to gather a group of folks and provide feedback as they're looking at this new industry, ways that they may want to contribute, or ways that, or critiques that they may have. And just recognizing that this is a new industry that impacts all. And those are things that we like to keep in mind over here at OCM as well. We have a newsletter. So if you are not already registered for it, you can go and head over to our website and get signed up. We send regular information about just up-to-date information about our office, and it's a great way to just stay informed. We anticipate to have educational and media campaigns both within our office, but recognizing that this is enterprise-wide and that the cannabis industry impacts so many different aspects of life. We anticipate to have educational and media campaigns to really get to the center of all of the efforts that are taking place. Cannabis ambassadors. Organically, there are already people that are doing this, people that have partnered with us, people that want to share our message. But we anticipate to have later in the process more formal ways that folks can continue to connect with our office and are out in the community, and that are really speaking the language and sharing information about both the Office of Cannabis Management, but also about the new industry and the upcoming plans that we have in place. As others have already mentioned, there's the rulemaking efforts that are already taking place right now, including the surveys, but upcoming public engagement sessions that'll take place later on in the spring. Those are also great examples of how folks can stay up to date with our office, provide input, and make sure that they feel like they're a part of the process. Then lastly, I also just want to emphasize that we also have a tribal liaison that has recently joined our team that is really leading a lot of the conversations with our tribes across the state. Recognizing the government to government relationship, we recognize how necessary it is to have somebody that is able to engage in those spaces and facilitate some of those conversations and consult as necessary. Just to speak about some of the work that we've done to date, we've had over 50 engagement opportunities since the summer, ranging from general overviews to subject-specific discussions. We've hosted a public webinar similar to the one that we're on right now that really gave an overview of our early work to establish the Office of Cannabis Management. We consistently meet with a variety of stakeholders, including our legislative and regulatory bodies, partners and advocates in the business community, partners and advocates just in the community, um, reoccurring meetings with trusted business and community and faith leaders representing communities that really were historically harmed by cannabis prohibition. And so just really understanding the importance of taking those relationships very seriously and having them kind of help inform and guide our work moving forward. Over some in the fall of last year, we did a number of multicultural radio and television segments, and plan to continue to do that as we get to kind of pivotal moments within the implementation process this year as well. And then one of the, I'd say, most meaningful places that I think some of our engagement works is the way that we are able to distribute resources out to partners, but also anybody that's on this call right now, and allowing them to be trusted voices for this new industry, allowing them to be the ones that are sharing those messages. And so I'll just put a plug in there that if you want to amplify the work that we're doing, please get on our listserv, please connect with me directly. And there are a number of places that people can continue to share our message and really help us inform and guide this new industry. Just to speak a little bit about some of the themes that we are hearing out in the community. First, I just want to share that a lot of the themes that we're hearing directly inform the work that we do here at the Office of Cannabis Management. They mirror the work that we're doing. They remind us that, we're on the right path, or allow us to pivot and recognize that, we might be missing something, or there are areas that and or the entire enterprise, because there's so many different people that are doing this work, can truly work on this as well. And so I'll just name a few of the different themes that we've heard, and some of the different ways that we're addressing it, or it's being addressed already in the legislation. Um, a number of people are really excited about licensing, and eagerly and respectfully, like, they want to know the process and the timing of when that takes place, and being able to share, what the rulemaking process is and how we need to get through that process before we can even get to licensing and such. A number of folks want to know about the social equity applicant process, business and community support services. Support services just for community more broadly, and the resources that are going to be available, industry and workforce training opportunities, and public health measures and community safety. And the exciting part, I'd say, of all of this work is that we have agencies that are already deep into this work right now, from the Department of Health, leading a number of efforts around public health engagement, and making sure that there is education that is going out around youth prevention and education for pregnant and breastfeeding individuals, to the work that the Department of Labor is doing around workforce training opportunities. And then, of course, DEED is ramping up for a number of different efforts over the next year, and really ongoing. And so, really being able to acknowledge that these themes are things that we take back into our work, and that really guide the work that we do moving forward. Um, we also, just to share a little bit of knowledge about the various grants. As many of you likely know, the Office of Cannabis Management has the authority and plans to establish the Can Renew grants, or the Cannabis Community Renewal grants. And this is essentially a program to award eligible organizations for investments in communities where long-term residents are eligible to be social equity applicants. We are already deep in the weeds, as some of my colleagues mentioned, are working to hire a grants manager to essentially manage this effort, so that we can really do the work to take what comes out of this industry and be able to reinvest it right into community, and really repair harm, and ensure that we're doing this in sustainable ways as well. And then, just to mention the others, this is a reminder of how this is a collective effort. There are a number of industry training grants that were named in the legislation, and that are being designed by our partner agencies at the Department of Employment and Economic Development and the Department of Agriculture. So these include Can Train, Can Navigate, Can Startup, and Can Grow. And really, they're designed to both stand up and support this industry moving forward. And then, just kind of wanting to conclude with some of the different ways that you can continue to engage, both with our office and just engagement opportunities more broadly. I mentioned earlier the Department of Labor and Industry, the work that they're already leading right now. They have a virtual meeting that is going to be taking place on February 16th. It's a Minnesota Dual Pipeline Legal Cannabis Industry Forum. It's really a space where they can talk about their pipeline program, opportunities to share about the recent workforce needs in the industry, time to review and provide input on some of the pipeline occupations, as well as it's really an opportunity to be able to engage with other members and interested people in the industry, to help really inform what are these new positions that are going to be needed, what is going to be needed for workforce. And then, of course, the engagement that you're able to do with us, please attend future rulemaking engagement sessions. We have surveys that are still going out throughout the month of February, one that is out right now. Request to have OCM at your upcoming event. You're able to do this just by going right onto our website and going to the About Us section. And there's a link there to request to have me or anybody from our team there. And then I'd say, at the bare minimum, amplify our message. Share resources with your network. Get on my listserv. Get on the listserv of the Office of Cannabis Management, and really be the voices within this industry, and help us get out the word to ensure that it's an equitable industry, and that we have as many people that want to are able to participate. And with that, I am handing it over to Shar.
Okay, So we have given you a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. There's a lot to digest. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be posting this on both our website and we'll be linking to it. So you'll be able to view the presentation in its entirety or review anything that you might have missed while we're moving so quickly. I just wanted to spend a minute really outlining what's next as we continue to do this work. You may have read last week that we have reopened the search for the permanent OCM director. So I will continue in my interim role until such time as a permanent leader is identified. The job is available. You can link to it on our website and you can see the job profile. There is a recruiter from the Department of Minnesota Management and Budget who's really assisting us in engaging a national search. We've made some adjustments to that position description, but would certainly welcome your help in sharing information about that position far and wide. Our goal is to have somebody named that governor would like to announce somebody by mid to end of May, and then begin onboarding that person, hopefully by early summer. We are going to continue hiring and onboarding our permanent staff. We are close to finalizing a location for our new office. So we are still right here in Cannabis Row at the Department of Agriculture, which has been a great incubator agency for us, but we are quickly outgrowing the limited space that they've got for us. And so we hope that our target is for the end of the first quarter of 2024 to have identified and begin the process of moving into and taking occupancy of that new office. We're continuing to build out our licensing application software. We're drafting rules, as Vanessa so thoroughly walked through with you. We're going to convene that first meeting of the Cannabis Advisory Council. The governor's office is the lead for government to government negotiations and engagement around, and specifically for tribal compacting, which will really articulate and identify those parameters that the tribes and the state agree upon for any sort of cannabis businesses operating outside of tribal lands. We are going to be convening this week a working group with local governments, with cities and counties to develop some model ordinances that cities can use as they think about what sort of business regulations they want to adopt in their municipalities. And so OCM is charged with leading that work and coming up with those model ordinances. And we're going to be convening that working group as early as this, or we are convening it this week. And then we're going to continue to finalize and refine our legislative proposals in anticipation of the legislature starting on February 12th. We know that it is a short session. We hope to move quickly through the legislative session and position ourselves both for, as I said, a successful market launch and sustained and effective regulation over time. All in service of what we are optimistic about establishing, which is a successful, accessible, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry in Minnesota. Again, thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you for your attention, your engagement. So many of you have reached out individually and or collectively. And we appreciate your continued engagement with us. We appreciate your continued questions. We appreciate the way you challenge our thinking. We're going to continue to offer opportunities, as Merone mentioned, both to update you and to continue some two-way conversations so you can share your best thinking. We are always looking for thought partners because this is not the work, as I've said many times, of one person. It is the work of an entire team. And as you've seen, we've got a pretty robust team in place doing this stand-up work. We're growing every day, but we consider so many of you part of that team as well. And so with that, it looks like we are about 2 minutes over time. But we appreciate your attention for the last hour. We appreciate your advocacy, and we look forward to crossing paths with you again soon. Have a good evening, everyone.